You can build your site to be search engine friendly, or you can build your site to virtually guarantee it won't be indexed well and will never rank high up in the search results. I'm not just talking about the way you will be optimizing your site, but the basic technology you use that can limit how well you do in the search engines. So in this lesson, I'm going to explain a few things to watch for. Technology and format changes that can have a huge effect on how well you do in the search results. I'll be talking about things such as frames and iframes, images and flash, things that complicate your site from the search engine standpoint. You might think of the base unit of a search engine friendly site, one that indexes well, as being the HTML file, text that is tagged with HTML code in a file containing a title tag and a description. As you'll learn in this course, you can insert keywords into the file path, the location of file name, into the title, into the description, and elsewhere. Once you start moving beyond this point, things start to get problematic. So let's begin with images. It used to be common to find websites that were predominantly images. One new client of mine I discovered 15 years ago had a website that was created in Photoshop and saved as a series of images that were then linked together. So all the text in the site was not real text, it was text in an image. This allowed the web designer to create a very attractive website very quickly, but it was a disaster from an SEO standpoint. As HTML has become more sophisticated, and as web design skills have become more common, this kind of thing is much rarer these days. You do sometimes find nav bars created using text embedded into little images, rather than actual text in the HTML. That's okay, but just be aware that it won't be readable text. You need links throughout your site, and ideally some should be text links in order to tell the search engines what the link to page is about. You'll learn about that in later lessons. In any case, this form of navbar is far less common than it used to be thanks to the widespread use of CSS. Now, some of you may be thinking, but I bet Google reads the text in images. Well, I think you need to assume that although Google has technology that allows it to read text in images, after all, Google Docs can read images and convert to text. It's not doing this for SEO purposes, and it's probably going to be years before text and images will be fully indexed, if ever. So you shouldn't expect images to help you with SEO. Now, I'm not saying you can't have images in your web pages. Of course you can. In fact, most websites need images. What I'm saying, though, is that you should remember that you need text for the search engines to index. I'll be talking more about that in a later lesson. And whenever you use images, whether you're using them for navigation bars or blocks of text, the content is not going to help you in the search engines. I'll explain later ways to optimize images so they may appear in image search results, but you'll actually be using text to optimize the images. The images themselves don't help SEO. Next, frames. Frames used to be very common and were a real problem in the search engines. I'm glad to say you don't see them so often these days, and when you do, they're not true HTML frames often, they're CSS layers. In fact, it's quite hard to find frames these days. I managed to find this example site that's been around for years, illustrating bad web design. As a matter of fact, these old frame tags are no longer supported in HTML. They were dumped in HTML5, though they do still work in popular browsers. So what I'm referring to here are HTML frame sets, which comprise 3 or more documents. The web page that loads is the frame definition or frame set document and contains instructions to the web browser telling it what frames you want and what to put into those frames. This code tells the browser to create 2 rows, the first of which is 91 pixels high, and the lower one takes up all the room that's left in the browser window below the first row. And within the second row, 2 columns are created, the first of which is 20% of the browser size. The code also tells the browser which documents to place into each frame: top.htm in the top bar, left.htm in the left column, and main.htm in the largest area. So I shouldn't spend too much time on frames because you probably won't be using them anyway, although some of you may have old sites that do still contain frames. But let me say a couple of things. The basic problem with frames is that search engines index individual pages, and frame sets comprise 3 or more HTML files, so the model just doesn't fit well with the way that search engines work. And as frames are disappearing from the web, the search engines probably don't think there's any need to come up with a workaround. So, because they don't fit the model well, pieces of the frame set can get indexed individually and documents can get orphaned, ending up in the search results out of their framed context. A search engine may link to the search content itself, which will then appear without the navigation. Even today, the search engines still state the frames are a problem. Google states that it does try to manage them properly, but also that it can't guarantee that it always will. Perhaps more common than frames are iframes. These are used to insert a window into a document, so another document can be viewed inside that first document through the window. In a sense, you're inserting one document into another in a very similar way that you would insert an image into the document. Note that I cut that previous Google quote for brevity, but in fact it actually says this. Thus, Google's comment that it has trouble managing frames also applies to iframes. Again, I'm not saying you shouldn't use iframes, just that you should be aware that there could be problems with search engine indexing. There may be situations in which it makes perfect sense to use iframes, but you should know that the documents inserted into the iframes may get indexed separately, which may be perfectly fine in some situations. Now, Adobe Flash. Flash is a very popular animation format, and there are good reasons to use it, but it's another of those things that don't play well with the search engines. Search engines can index the content of Flash files, but not well. The proof? Ask yourself how often you see a Flash file listed in the search results near the top. Almost never, and only for keywords that are not very competitive. Also, there's a similar problem to frames. If you embed a Flash file in an HTML file, you now have 2 independent files, which may get indexed separately. However, as Flash doesn't rank well in search engines, you'll rarely find an orphaned Flash file in the search results. It used to be popular to create entire sites using Flash, which is generally a disaster from a search ranking standpoint. And now, at the time of filming this lesson, there's another problem. For a while, Firefox, one of the world's most popular browsers, actually disabled Flash by default so it couldn't run because of a security vulnerability. Adobe released an update, and that could now be run within Firefox, but many people are still using the old version that will be blocked. And Flash doesn't run on many mobile devices. There are ways to make Flash more SEO friendly by combining Flash with HTML. For instance, there's SWF Object, which allows a developer to embed Flash content into HTML using JavaScript. In effect, you provide alternatives, putting text into a div tag so that users can see the Flash, but the search engines will read the text. That's an advanced subject, though, which I won't be getting into. However, Google is actively discouraging people using mobile devices from visiting pages that contain Flash. Thus, there are a bunch of reasons to be wary of Flash. The security issue, of course, the fact that both Google and Firefox don't like it much and may discourage people from using it, and the fact that Flash simply never ranks well in the search engines. How about Silverlight, Microsoft's answer to Flash? Well, I'm sure most of you have never heard of it. It never quite caught on. You can assume that anything in Silverlight probably won't be indexed. Browsers don't support it well, and in fact Silverlight is disappearing as Microsoft is no longer developing it. Then there's PDF files. PDF files are read and indexed. However, ask yourself again, how often do you see PDF files at the top of the search results? It sometimes happens, but generally only when you use a really specific search phrase, and even with very specific searches, the search engines will still give preference to an HTML page if they can find a decent match. The only reason this patent, for instance, is appearing at the top of the search results is because I told Google I wanted to see a PDF file by including file type :PDF in the search query. Even though it's a very specific search, and the PDF is really the original document, without the file type piece, the PDF is not shown. I often find clients have a bunch of PDFs on their site because they already have various PDF documents and they can quickly drop them into the site. But it's often a good idea to convert the PDFs to HTML because HTML will probably rank better. PDFs don't use the HTML tags you'll be learning about later, tags we use to optimize pages for the search engines, title tags, description tags, H tags, and so on. So PDFs are at a disadvantage right from the start. This goes for other formats too. The search engines read and index various formats such as PowerPoint, Excel, PostScript, and so on. But don't count on these things doing much for your SEO efforts. They don't rank well. Now, something a bit geekier. What kind of URL is your system creating? You need a system that can create nicely keyworded URLs, not gobbledygook. As you'll learn later, we put keywords into URLs to help with SEO, and in fact Google even recommends that you do so. So a URL like this isn't helpful from an SEO perspective. This is a genuine URL, by the way. And here's the exact same product, but on a different site that has evidently done some SEO work. This would be much more useful from an SEO perspective. As I explained in the lesson on development tools, you need to be able to manipulate the URLs in some way to customize them and get keywords into them. Avoid using systems that can't do this, although most these days do provide a level of control. So this lesson has provided a few things to think about, things to avoid doing. I've had many clients over the years whose sites have been seriously hurt in the search ranks for these very things. Sites that were too image heavy, had too much flash, used PDFs instead of HTML and so on. You might want to spend a few minutes reviewing your site and content for these things, and if you have these problems, come up with a strategy for fixing them. I want you to forget about SEO for a moment and think about non-SEO issues, because SEO isn't everything. Focus purely on the mechanics of SEO and ignore other critical issues, and you're making a huge mistake. Let me give you an example. In 2006, a business selling expensive industrial equipment came to me for help, telling me that they needed more search engine traffic. I took one look at their website and told them no, they didn't. They needed a new website. Their site was so horrible, it didn't matter how much traffic they got. They could not be successful. I wish I could show you this site, but for obvious reasons I can't. I don't think my client would be very happy to be publicly humiliated. So instead, I found an example from webpagesthatsuck.com, a site that's been reviewing dreadful web design for almost 2 decades. Now, this example is pretty ugly, but unfortunately I couldn't find an example quite as ugly as my client's site. It was actually far worse than this. The top of the page actually contained the name of the company in those animated burning letters people used back in the late 1990s. Some of you old folks may remember that. Anyway, we rebuilt the site, and the day they launched, their business started growing. They had already had traffic coming to the site, but people were rarely buying from them because the site design, the old site design, turned them off. It was so ugly, it just didn't seem professional, and buyers simply weren't willing to do business with this company. Actually, amazingly, they had been doing some business previously, but not much. They only sold over the phone and were doing around $10,000 worth of business each month, just a handful of orders. But with a new site, they were able to push that into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They told me that with the old site, the few people who did call asked pointed questions. What's the source of this equipment you're selling? Is it high quality? Is it safe? And so on. When we launched the new site, the CEO told me, people don't ask questions anymore, they just call and place orders. Today, this company is an industry leader in its area, but I don't believe they could have done that without a decent website. So this is an extreme example. It demonstrates that focusing purely on SEO is only part of the game. Obviously, this course is about SEO, and that's what we'll focus on here, keywords and tags and links and so on. But I did at least want to make this point that there are other things you need to consider too. There's no point using SEO to bring people to the site if your site has problems that will deter them doing what you need them to do. So, a few things to consider. First, ugly won't sell. Or, to use a quaint Texan phrase, that dog don't hunt. It won't work. It's not fit for purpose, as they say in the UK. You must have an attractive, professional-looking website. Having said that, you don't need award-winning graphic design. I'm sure Amazon and Google have never won any graphic design contests. But you do need professional. So be honest. Look at your site and ask questions such as these. Would you buy from your site? Does it look professional, or does it look like it was built by an amateur web developer in the 1990s? If you put your site in one browser tab and a competitor's in another, then jump back and forth between them, does yours look unprofessional in comparison with your competitors? Another thing to consider is how easy it is to use your site. The fancy term these days is information architecture, IA. You may also hear the term user experience or UX, and in the past the more popular term was user interface or UI design. Essentially, all these terms mean making it easy for your visitors to find their way around the site, to use the site. Again, there's no point using SEO to bring people to your site, then turn them off by making it hard for them to do business with you. This is a very common problem. Here's another thing to consider. I've been telling my clients for more than a decade that they need to think about messaging, about what they're trying to tell new visitors who arrive at their sites, what they want the visitors to do when they arrive on these sites. All too often, websites are built by just throwing everything into a blender, rather than thinking about process and flow. When the visitor lands on the site, you want to tell them X, then you want them to do Y, and so on. You can learn a lot from sites you'll find these days that clearly focus very tightly on a single message. Sites such as these. They push the clutter out of the way and try to convey a message within seconds of the visitor arriving. Okay, let's come back to SEO now. Because Google has a goal of trying to figure out these things for itself. It not only wants to figure out if your site is a good match for a searcher's keywords, but it also wants to figure out if it does direct the searcher to your site, if the searcher is going to find your site useful, or is the user going to turn around and come straight back to Google? And Google is getting much better at this, at analyzing sites and in effect checking them for searches from a usability and attractiveness standpoint. This is something we'll be discussing in a later lesson, but the takeaway right now is that having a professional, easy-to-use site is not only good for your visitors, but it may actually help in the search engines. However, having said all this, don't then make the mistake of thinking that you can ignore SEO, just focus on IA, UX, UI, messaging and nothing else. It's popular today in the online marketing field for people to make blanket statements like SEO is dead or forget linking and just focus on making your site easy to use. That's also a huge mistake, at least if you want to generate traffic from the search engines. SEO techniques are still important and still do work, but you just have to put them into the right context. Now let's consider an important and somewhat sensitive site preparation issue. The question is, who is building your website? And does that person or team understand SEO? I've got into a lot of trouble in the past. I've apparently offended plenty of people with my comments, in particular web designers. But my loyalty is to my clients and the people who I'm training, whether in person, through books or online courses. I'm going to tell you the facts. I'm not intending to offend anyone, but what I'm about to say is quite simply true. The fact is, many web developers and web design firms know very little about SEO. If you're a web designer, then I'm happy to see that you're educating yourself in this area, and obviously you're not my target. But I've learned over 15 years or so that most web developers do not understand SEO and will not optimize your site properly if left up to the job themselves. I've learned this from both my own experience and the experiences of scores of consulting clients I've worked with over the years. And it's not just a past problem. Just yesterday, I was talking with a development firm building a large new site for an important client of mine, and it became quite clear during the conversation that I could not just step away and hope they would optimize the site properly. I will have to advise them and watch them step by step.
Unfortunately, there's another very significant problem. Although most web development firms do not understand SEO, they almost always claim they do. Why? Because all their competitors claim the same thing. But they almost certainly don't. So please don't make the mistake of hearing your developer say, "No problem, we'll deal with the SEO, leave it to us," and then stepping away and trusting them to get the job done. In 9 cases out of 10, probably 95 out of 100 in fact, they will not do a good job. So you, or someone on your team, needs to be educated in the area of SEO so that you can ensure the job is being done correctly. There's another related issue. Who is creating the content for your site, and do they understand your keywords and how to use them? Any content development team needs to think about keywords, needs to know what your important keywords are, how to focus on a particular keyword phrase for particular pieces of content, and that they should also be using other related terms scattered throughout the content. I find it useful for content developers to have a list of keywords on the wall behind their computer screens so they can glance up now and then and remind themselves of the terms they should be using.
At this point, you may want to take a little time and consider this issue. You need to discover how much your developers understand about SEO and come up with a plan for oversight. For learning SEO yourself, completing this course would be a good thing to do, and then keeping an eye on site development to make sure SEO is being done properly as the site progresses. By now, you should understand your keywords and you've prepared your site. In this part of the course, I'm going to explain a few useful first steps in your actual SEO campaign. It's always a good thing to know how much of your site is already indexed to create a sort of baseline. You can very quickly ask the search engines to tell you how many pages they have in the index. I'll show you the simple technique for doing that. And if your site isn't indexed, well, I'll provide a few clues as to why that may be. I also want to go over the search results. When you search at a major search engine these days, the results you see don't always come from the same place. They come from several different indexes. So we're going to look at the search results page, dissect it in effect, and I'll explain which pieces you have control over and how, and which you don't, or at least which you can't influence through SEO. If you already have a website, you might want to check to see if the site is already indexed in the search engines, and if so, how deeply. How many pages on the site are included in the index?
You can do this using the site:/domain name syntax in both Google and Bing. Yahoo gets its search results from Bing, so there's no need to check Yahoo separately. All you need to do is type site:/ followed by your domain name and press enter. Both Google and Bing will show you search results on your site and tell you how many pages are indexed. This isn't always an accurate number, in particular with very large sites. As you click through the results pages, the number may change, but it does give you a good idea of how much of a site is indexed. Of course, you can use this to check up on competitors' sites too. You can also use this technique to find out how many pages in your site or a competing site have a particular piece of text. Just start with the site: piece, then add the text you want to search for, like this. By the way, when you put a search term into quotation marks like this, you're asking the search engine to search for that particular exact phrase, not just the separate words. You can even examine the site in more detailed ways using other search functions like this. In this case, I'm asking Google to find pages in this site that contain the text rabbit-hutch in the URL. This won't work on Bing because the in-URL syntax isn't used by Bing. Obviously, you have to match up the correct syntax for the search engine you're using.
What if you do have a site and it isn't indexed? Why would that be? Well, that's something I'll explain in the next lesson. In the previous lesson, I showed you a quick technique to figure out if an existing site is already indexed by the search engines. Let's say you discover that it isn't, or perhaps that it is, but only a small proportion of the pages are indexed. Why is that? Why wouldn't your site be indexed? There are a few possibilities.
If it's a pretty new site, well, Maybe the search engines haven't had a chance to get to it yet. However, the major search engines are incredibly fast at indexing the web now. It really shouldn't take long for them to index your site if you have links pointing to the site. If a new site has sufficient links pointing to it, it can be picked up in days, hours even in the right circumstances. The most common reason for a site not being indexed is that it simply doesn't have links pointing to it from other websites. If it doesn't, the search engines can't find it. Later in this course, I'll be telling you about ways to submit your website to the search engines, ways to tell the search engines that your site exists. But submitting to the search engines is still not a reliable way to get your site indexed. The search engines really want to find links pointing to your site from other websites. After all, the basic reasoning goes, if nobody can bother to link to your site, how useful can the site be? And why should the search engines bother indexing a site nobody wants to link to? So links are essential. Perhaps you do have a few links and you're still not indexed. Well, perhaps the links are on web pages that themselves have not been indexed by the search engines, so the search engines don't know the links exist. Or maybe they're sites that themselves are unpopular, so the search engines are only indexing the sites infrequently. In a lesson, we'll be looking at ways to analyze links, but here's just a quick way to find out if there are any links pointing to your website. Go to majesticseo.com. This is a link analysis site with a vast database of information about links between sites and pages on the web. Enter the URL of your website into this box, then press enter or click the search button. If you see this, if Majestic can't find your site, then there are quite likely no links pointing to it. What you really want to see is something like this. We'll come back to linking analyses later. So, a lack of links is the most common problem, but there are other possibilities. One is that you have a problem with your robots.txt or robots meta tags, that you're instructing search bots to not index your site. We'll be looking at these things later in this course, but for now I'll just mention that this text in your robots.txt file will block the search bots. This isn't likely to happen, but it does sometimes when someone makes a mistake in creating the file. I've even seen a case in which a site was hacked and this text added to the robots.txt file in order to kick the site out of the search engines. Another possibility is that your site is hosted on a really bad web server. If your site loads very slowly or is simply not functioning much of the time, the search engines will have trouble reaching your pages, and even if they do manage to index the site, will in effect penalize the site. They don't want to present search results to their users that simply don't work well. Another possibility is a bad domain name, a domain name that's been used in the past for SEO tricks and has been permanently damaged, permanently penalized by the search engines. This is unlikely, but it can happen and can be very difficult to diagnose. You can investigate the domain using services such as domainhistory.net and domaintools.com to see the domain name's history and find out whether it's been used before. If it's a brand new domain, of course, this can't be the problem. You might also use the Wayback Machine at archive.org to take a look at websites that used to be on the domain to see if they look spammy. You might also do a search for the domain name to see what people may be saying about it. Perhaps you can find people in forums complaining about it. Another rare possibility is broken canonical tags. These tags are used to tell search engines the source of content on a web page. You'll learn more about them in the lesson on duplicate content. If the canonical tag is accidentally misused, it can cause pages to not be indexed. In effect, it's telling the search engines to index a different page. Finally, another possibility. Your site is using URLs that are too complex. This is pretty rare these days, but a few years ago, dynamic websites, sites in which pages were created on the fly by inserting data from a database into templates and sending the page out when requested by a browser or search bot. Dynamic websites often had problems with indexing. Also, sites using session IDs every time a page was served could run into problems. But indexing problems due to these issues are rare today.
I've outlined the issues that may cause problems pretty much in order of likelihood. If you do have problems with indexing, really the most common problem, the most likely issue is linking. You just don't have good links pointing to your site. You'll learn what to do about that in detail later in this course. So far in this course, I've focused on preparation, how to get ready for your SEO campaign, from picking the right keywords to selecting the right technology. In the next section, we'll get started, beginning with thinking about the content you're going to place onto your web pages. Before we do that, though, I just want to make sure that you understand where the search results come from and which pieces of the search results page we're trying to affect.
There are various different components and sources for search results. Our primary focus in this course is with what is known as the organic, natural or free search results. These are the results that the search engines collect by using search bots crawling the web, gathering data. Let's look at this page of search results and figure out what all the different pieces are. We'll look at Google, but the basic story is the same for all major search engines, that the search results page comprises various different things from different places. I searched for the term rabbit hutch and various things appeared. At the top on the right we have product results. This stuff actually comes from Google's shopping index, and all major search engines have similar types of results. If we click on the Shop for Rabbit Hutch on Google link, we'll be taken to another page with more shopping results. We won't be looking at how to get into the shopping results in this course because that's an advertising strategy, a totally different thing from SEO. You can see over here that there's a little sponsored heading, a euphemism for advertisement. At the top of the main column, we can see a couple of PPC ads coming out of the Google AdWords system, a pay-per-click advertising system. All the major search engines use pay-per-click advertising, so-called because advertisers are charged a fee when somebody clicks on the ad, not when the ad is displayed. And again, this is not what we're concerned with in this SEO course. Below the ads, we can see some image results. These images actually do come from the organic results index, search results coming from the primary search engine index created by search bots traveling around the web gathering information. If we click the images link, we see more images. When I discuss the image tag later in this course, I'll talk a little about how to get your images into this area. Over here on the right, we see more pay-per-click ads. This entire column is PPC ads from the AdWords system. These days, Google displays a little ad icon to denote that these are advertisements. Finally, as we get down the page, we see the full organic index results. This is traditionally, 10 search results, but in this case there are actually 9 for some reason. In fact, Google has recently moved away from always putting 10 organic results into the results page, and is also increasing the number of ads that may appear at the top of the page. There used to be a de facto limit of 3 ads at the top, though you may see more these days. However, in some cases the organic results may be pushed lower down. Let's search for pizza. We still have ads at the top of the page and down the right side, though no shopping results this time. But we have another couple of things. Firstly, you'll notice that we have local results. In fact, if I click this More Pizza link, we even go to a page that shows a map with pizza parlor locations. I'll be talking a little about these results later in the course in the section on local search, but this information does not come out of the organic index, so much of what we discuss in this course doesn't help you get into this local results area. Rather, you need to register your business in the Google My Business system. So if you need to be in this area, make sure you don't miss the local search section of this course. Over on the right side, we also have an information box, the knowledge graph. These things provide snippets of information about people, places, things, companies, and so on. In this case, we can open up the box to find nutritional information. The information for these knowledge graphs comes from a variety of locations, including specialty information such as Wikipedia and the CIA World Factbook. But some of the information does come from the organic index. And in fact, in the lessons on structured data markup, I'll be explaining how you can feed information to the knowledge graph in some cases, at least information about yourself and your company. Now, if we scroll down the page a little more, we'll see the organic results. Again, we have 9 results here. These down here also look like organic results, but notice this light separator line here. I think these results are actually coming out of Google's News Index. Here's an example of news results being fed into the top of the page. I'll probably post a lesson on news results at some point, but it's not really the focus of this course.
Our primary focus in this course is on the organic results, what you need to do to your pages and website to have your results rank well in the search results that are gathered by Google's search bots and the other search engines, of course. We won't be looking at how to work with advertising results, though we will take a look at the local results and the knowledge graph. You need content in your website. What does that mean? It means stuff, and by that I mean text. Sure, you can have images and video and animations and all sorts of other things, but from an SEO standpoint, at the end of the day, you need textual content, as I'll explain. So in this part of the course, we're going to look at the issue of how to get text into your site. I know many of you have heard the phrase content is king. Well, I'm going to explain why that phrase is completely misleading. It's just not true. But I'm also going to explain why you still do need quality content and discuss a few different places you might find it and different ways you might create it. The good news is you may already have enough content. If you spent much time in SEO circles, you may have heard that your site must be an authority site in order to compete in the search engines. But not every website has to be or even can be an authority on a subject with world-class information. Continue to the lessons and I'll explain why. Before we get started on content, I just want to cover this content is king thing because it's a pet peeve of mine. I hate this phrase. It strikes me as a really dumb, nonsensical statement that can mislead people into taking the wrong path in their SEO efforts.
This is a very popular phrase in the SEO business, in particular, of course, among companies that help site owners create content. I found more than 400,000 pages when I Googled the exact phrase, content is king, in combination with the word SEO. It typically means that content on a website is more important than the links pointing to the website. But it's quite simply wrong, and here's why. Is content important? Yes, you have to have some kind of content, generally meaning text, on your website. Is more content better than less content from an SEO perspective? Yes. But can a site rank well with great content but no links pointing to it? Absolutely not. Conversely, can a site with little content rank well in the search results if it has sufficient links? Absolutely yes, it definitely can. Must every site that wants to rank well in the search engines create world-class content? No. Often a site can work with what it's got, just general, average stuff. Of course, the more competitive the arena, the more important content becomes, but it's misleading to tell small business owners, for instance, that the only way they can compete is by creating world-class content. It's just not true. I'll give you an example. A few days before I created this lesson, I received an email from a client I'd worked with some time ago, a company that manufactures picture frames. This company wanted some more consulting time. They told me that 2 years ago, they were on the second page of the search results for their top keywords. Then they moved to the bottom of the first page, and now they're in the top 3 or 4. How did they do that? Did they undertake a content is king focused SEO campaign? No, they focused on on-page optimization and garnering links pointing to their website, a subject you'll learn more about later.
So that's what I dislike about this content is king phrase. It misleads people by implying that there's only one strategy to be followed, and it's quite simply not true. Many sites have used content strategies to do very well, but such strategies are often not viable for small businesses and not the only way to play the SEO game. Now I've said that, you can move on to the other lessons and learn how content is important and how to play the content game. When people in the SEO field talk about content, they typically mean text. Certainly there's a place in websites for images, video, audio, animations, and so on. But primarily the search engines are indexing text. And even when you're trying to optimize images and video, for instance, it's text that's associated with those items that gets indexed. I'll be explaining how to optimize images and video in later lessons. It's a simple and often frustrating fact that search engines have a bias for text. It's understandable because how else do the search engines assess websites? The easiest thing to do is read what the sites say and base the assessment on that. Anything beyond that gets very complicated. The frustration that many website owners feel is that they may have a really good, very useful website that does not have much text, but they'll be at a disadvantage in the search engines against less useful sites that have more content.
Indeed, this unavoidable focus on content has led to the creation of truly vast quantities of text for the sole purpose of helping sites rank well in the search engines. This reminds me of the observer effect in physics, which states that when you observe something, you necessarily modify what you're observing. The search engines try to observe the web, and in doing so have caused enormous changes to the web, resulting in the creation of monumental quantities of content, much of it garbage, and literally billions of links, something we'll talk about later in this course. So you do need textual content, and the more the better from an SEO standpoint. Of course, the content has to contain useful keywords, as I explain elsewhere. In effect, the content becomes a vehicle to carry the keywords that you want the search engines to associate with your site. The more content you have, the more pages you'll have, which results in more useful keyword placements in title tags, URLs, heading tags, and so on, which you'll learn about a little later. In fact, there are two essential content strategies. The first is simply to create content to carry keywords, so you have lots and lots of pages in your site with useful keywords, and in fact there's a whole content creation industry built up around this idea. You can buy articles for as little as $1 or $2, but they certainly won't match the description of quality content. And by the way, the search engines are getting better all the time at recognizing garbage text, so whatever content you do have on your site needs to be decent. The other strategy is to create truly high-quality content that will attract links. This is a concept known as link bait, something I cover later in this course. The idea is that you provide something so useful, interesting, funny, intriguing, or entertaining that people will link to it from their websites, thus providing the sort of links that the search engines award websites for getting, thus pushing your site up in the search engine results. And of course, the links themselves will bring traffic to your site. Actually, link bait content doesn't necessarily have to be textual content. It could be video, for instance. It's the incoming links that do the SEO work for you, though for each page of content you'll still have keywords in the URL, title, and so on. But how much content do you need? Well, that depends. Enough to get the job done, but how much that is depends on how much competition you're facing in the search engines, and is often far less than people in the content creation business claim. It also depends on how many links you have pointing to your site and the quality of those links. The more high-quality links you already have, the less additional content you need. As I explained in the previous video, content is not king. It's merely one other tool in the SEO arsenal. So how do you approach the content issue? Firstly, you must have some content, because the content carries your keywords. Secondly, you should always look out for opportunities to add more content. I often find that my consulting clients actually have additional content they could be using that isn't on the site once they start thinking about the question. Content is frequently a real problem for e-commerce sites, which often simply grab a little text from product manufacturers or wholesalers and consequently end up with very content-light web pages. These two e-commerce sites, for instance, are selling the same product, but one has twice the amount of text as the other.
So, wherever possible, put more content into your site. But does that mean you undertake a full content strategy? There's a lot of advice on the web suggesting that every site needs tons of high-quality content, that pretty much the only viable SEO strategy involves the creation of large amounts of content by writing articles and running blogs and so on. But this simply isn't true. That's one strategy, and can often work, but it can be expensive and is not always necessary. I'm always suspicious when people suggest one-size-fits-all strategies without regard to context.
My feeling is that you should consider two things. Firstly, your competition. If you're in an intensely competitive area, in the sense that you have a lot of competitors actively using SEO to grab real estate on the search results page, then creating large amounts of content may be the only way for you to compete. But the other thing to consider is how far you can get by doing the basic SEO stuff, working with the content you already have. In many arenas, it's entirely possible for a business to work with what they've got. Perhaps beef up the content a little, expanding product descriptions, for instance, and then optimize pages, as I'll describe soon, putting keywords into URLs, title tags, heading tags, scattered throughout the body text, and so on. And then use some of the basic link building strategies you'll learn about later in this course.
It really is not necessary for every business to get into the content creation business in order to compete in the search engines. Many will find they do very well without spending large sums of money on content. As you've learned, although not every site needs a full-blown expensive content strategy, all sites do need at least some content, and more is generally better than less, which raises the question, where is this content coming from? You have a number of options.
The first thing to do is grab the low-hanging fruit. In most cases, there's already content available to you fairly obviously. For example, if you have an e-commerce site, what product information is available? Gather together everything you possibly can. Ask the manufacturers and wholesalers for all the information they have. If you are or work for the manufacturer, then talk with the design team about what's available, and so on. There is usually content available if you look for it. Now, as I explained earlier, one keyword strategy is to develop a list of keywords for which you want to rank well, then create an optimized page for each one, working your way down the list. For such a strategy, you may find yourself in a situation in which you need to stretch a little more and move past the low-hanging fruit. Essentially, you have three options. You can create the content yourself, pay someone to create it, or look for other forms of existing content. Creating content yourself, and perhaps that means finding someone within your team to create it, can often be difficult because it needs to be well-written content, and not everyone is capable of producing that. If you're lucky enough to have access to writers, either in the marketing department or perhaps technical writing department, that's great. But in the case of small or one-person businesses, you really need to decide if you're capable of producing decent content. Unfortunately, I've seen a number of situations in which my clients have attempted to produce content themselves and not done such a great job of it. Of course, creating content is also time-consuming, which is often a problem for small business people.
But look for shortcuts. Perhaps you can write summaries of other content you find on the web, summaries of articles related to your business perhaps, and of course you'll provide links to those articles. Or perhaps you can write reviews of other websites or products. This is often known as content curation, and many popular websites have been built around this idea. Sites that in effect are in the business of talking about other sites. In fact, that's essentially what Pinterest is, an image content curation platform.
Of course, you can also buy content or pay people to write content. This is big business, in fact. You can hire people through many channels. Hire them locally, perhaps through local college bulletin boards, through Craigslist, or perhaps through the freelancer sites such as Elance, Odesk, Guru, Nowcree, Freelancer, and more. You can find very low-cost content, sometimes written by people who clearly did not learn English as their native language, although I would not recommend that. While people have used very low-cost and low-quality articles to merely act as keyword vehicles for SEO purposes, the search engines are getting better all the time at recognizing garbage content. It's also a real problem when real live visitors arrive on your site and discover how badly written it is. This can really hurt your credibility. There are also a number of companies that focus on creating content for websites, companies such as Brafton and Idea Launch. These companies provide much higher quality work, though of course they're generally more expensive. though often not prohibitively so. Some of these companies have staff writers, others provide an exchange in which writers and buyers can connect. Search for the term content marketing and you'll find plenty of these companies. Here are a couple of things to consider when buying content though. Firstly, you need a contract that states that the work is a work for hire, at least if you're in the United States. If you don't have such an agreement, then the writer owns the copyright of the article, so can resell it to other sites. The second issue is that in fact many writers do just that. They write an article for a site owner, then try selling it elsewhere. Or perhaps you commission them to write an article, so they search for an existing article and send that to you. It's quicker to grab an article from somebody else's website than to write it, after all. I'll discuss duplicate content in a later lesson, and it's not necessarily the disastrous situation that some people claim. But still, if you're working with a writer who creates 100 articles for you, you don't want to then discover those 100 articles on dozens of other websites. Tools such as Copyscape can help you find out if an article you've just bought has been used elsewhere.
You need content, but you may not need a lot. Early in your SEO campaign, you should think about the low-hanging fruit. Later you may find that you have so much competition that you really do need to invest in more content, but you may want to see how your SEO campaign develops before you make that decision. So for the moment, you might want to just jot down a list of possible places that you can find content to get started with. The obvious thing to do is to create brand new content for your website, either by writing it yourself or paying someone else. And as explained in earlier videos, you should certainly pluck the low-hanging fruit, the content just waiting to be used. But where else can you find content for your website? There are many ways to find content, as you'll see in this lesson. The ideas that I'll discuss in this lesson are merely that, just ideas. In fact, there's a multitude of information sources. I want to just plant some seeds in your mind and other ideas may grow.
Let's start with open content. You may have heard of open source software. It's free software, software created by a programming community, software that anyone can take and use under certain conditions. Well, there's also open source content, or open content, sometimes known as copyleft, as opposed to copyright. The obvious example is Wikipedia, of course. Anyone can take and use on their website any article from Wikipedia with the correct attribution. Wikipedia articles are covered under the Creative Commons license, the most common such license, but there are other forms. And Wikipedia isn't the only wiki that has content you can use. In fact, Wikipedia's own list of wikis page contains dozens of different wikis, covering areas from music to genealogy, from mathematics to Star Wars fiction. Searching for the terms Creative Commons and Share Alike, perhaps in conjunction with general keywords related to your area of interest, can help you find more materials. You might also use the search term free content, of course. Another form of content you may be able to find for free is government-published materials, at least in the United States, where most government-published materials are in the public domain. Other countries will have other rules, of course. There are a few exceptions. Much of the post office's materials are not public domain. They don't want people printing their own stamps. And some materials that have been donated to the government may still be covered by copyright law. And works created by the National Technical Information Service or by non-governmental agencies working for the government may be copyright protected. But vast amounts of information are available free from the US government. And it's not just textual content, but audio and video too. Try some of these sites to find government materials. Or search for site:/gov and then your keywords. Another place to look for content is more traditional syndication services. Content syndication has actually been around for a long time. It predates the internet by many decades. Think of newspaper syndication, for instance. So there are a number of syndication services you might want to look into. And you may in fact find specialized services that focus on a particular industry, such as AKZO Media, which focuses on the real estate business. The problem, of course, is that you'll have to pay for this kind of content. In a similar vein are the advertorial companies such as BrandPoint, which actually provide free content and usually quite high quality. Advertorials are articles that appear to be editorial content, but are actually advertisements. This is very common in the newspaper business and has been going on since at least the 1940s. These days, the advertorial companies distribute content for both newspapers and the web. The content is free because the people who want the advertorials distributed pay, in the hopes that the content gets picked up. If you do use advertorial content, I recommend that you either don't include links in the content pointing out of your sites, or if there are any links, they are no-follow links. This is a subject I talk about later in the lesson about the buying and selling of links. There's another form of content syndication, the article libraries. This used to be a popular link building technique. The idea is that people write articles, add a bio or about the author section at the bottom of the article, with a link in it of course, then distribute the articles through the article libraries. This form of link building isn't as effective as it used to be, but there's still lots of content available out on the libraries. Much of it is very low quality, but you can sometimes find decent stuff, though you'll probably want to check to make sure it's not already used on hundreds of other websites.
One thing may have occurred to you, especially if you've spent any time researching SEO. In some cases, using the content sources described in this lesson will result in your site containing what is known as duplicate content. Is that a problem? In some cases perhaps, but not as often as the SEO misinformation suggests. But I'll explain more in a lesson later in this section. The online world began with the concept of user-generated content. And many of the world's biggest websites are based on user-generated content. And user-generated content can be a good SEO strategy too.
What do I mean by user-generated content? I mean that the visitors to a service or site create the content that appears on the service or site. The early online services, back in the 1980s, the small BBS or bulletin board systems, CompuServe, AOL, Prodigy, and so on, were based on this concept. The company would provide a platform, a system, and the members would generate most of the content. More recently, sites such as Facebook, MySpace, Wikipedia, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Reddit, StumbleUpon, and so on are all user content-based systems. The companies running the sites provide the software, and the users of the site provide the content. So it's possible to play the same game on your website by providing a way for visitors to the site to post their own content. The most common way to do this is to set up a bulletin board or discussion board system within your site. If you can attract enough people to the site to create a community, a forum, then each time someone writes something in a message, keywords are being added to your site. And as the discussion expands, more keyworded pages are being added. Your visitors are building keyworded pages for you. This e-commerce site has more than 25,000 keyworded pages from its forum indexed by Google. Now, this technique is not for everyone and usually not for a site just starting out. You need critical mass, enough people coming to the site to get the discussion going. However, it's something that's been used very effectively by many sites. If you can make it work, then not only do you get an SEO boost, but you also have people coming to the site for the discussion. One technique that's often used, however, is to, in effect, turn customer support into a conversation, and that conversation will often help in the search engines. Websites providing customer support can have community support areas, for instance. Each time someone asks a question, that's more keyworded content. Many large software companies have successfully used this technique. TechSmith, for instance, the company that makes the screen capture software being used for this course, has over 40,000 community support pages indexing Google.
This is not a strategy to be taken lightly, though, and definitely not for most people just getting started on their SEO work, as it can take some careful planning and a lot of energy to get it started.